Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk Real Estate. My name is Kristen Jock with Compass, and on this week's episode I am discussing co-ops, condos, and condops. But what's the difference? And I just want to start off by saying happy Halloween since it is October 31st. And I think that when people are approaching the unique types of building structures in New York City, it can be somewhat frightful. So I'm hoping that this information will help to streamline the process, make it a little less ambiguous, and help people to better understand what are co-ops, condos, and condops. So to start off, cooperatives, you do not own real property. You own shares in a corporation, and you're given what's called a proprietary lease to live in the specific unit that you do. And a board comprised of shareholders makes decisions for the overall building. And in addition, it's generally managed by a managing agent who oversees the building operations. Some terms that you might hear often in a cooperative would be maintenance. So maintenance is the monthly fee that's charged to all shareholders within the building. And it does depend on the number of shares that you have, which is based upon the size of your unit. So for example, if you have a 2-bedroom in the building, you may pay a larger maintenance due to having more shares than say a studio within the building. Also, your taxes are included in your maintenance fee, and hence part of your maintenance is tax deductible. Some other terms that you would hear if you were looking to buy a cooperative would be things like offering plan or the memorandum, which basically provides a blueprint for the corporation, all of the apartments within that corporation, layouts, etc. when it's being formed. You also have things like house rules, which govern the rules for living within the building. Each year, every shareholder would receive a copy of the financials that were filed for the building, which basically looks at how much income is being generated by the building. That could be through rentals that the building retains and are owned by shareholders, as well as the maintenance that they collect, and any other types of rent that they might collect. So that could be through parking or bicycle rentals or storage rentals. And then they would look at the expenses, so things like your utility bills, so the cost of any repairs, etc. Something that's also different about cooperatives is that there is an application process with co-ops. So you do have to submit an application, apply to the co-op board, sit down for an interview with them. And once they approve you, then you can close on your stock certificate. And that is a little bit different than the other two that I'll be discussing later on. And finally, I'll just share on co-ops that they do tend to be more restrictive than condos on things to do with living within the building. So pet policy, alterations within your unit, and also subletting. Those things would all be more restrictive than in a condo. So next we'll talk about condos. So condos, you actually do own real property or the unit that you're living within. There is a board which is comprised of condo unit owners, and they would govern sort of the decisions for the building. And then depending on the size of the building, up to, I'd say, 10 units could be a self-managed building. Anything 10 units or more is more than likely going to be managed by a managing agent or a management company who would oversee the building operations. So some terms that you might commonly hear with condos would be common charges. That is the fee that's charged to condo owners within the building to help to go towards building expenses. And something that's different from co-ops is that your taxes usually aren't included in common charges. Your taxes are billed to you separately, And if you do have a mortgage, they're generally paid through your mortgage. Also in condos, the application is usually requested from the building, but it's usually just a formality in relation to co-ops where you actually have to go through an approval and interview process. And finally, condos tend to be less restrictive than co-ops in terms of things like living within the building. So that would include your pet policy, your alterations to your apartment, and subletting. One way in which it does tend to come up in New York City has to do with subletting through Airbnb. So there are buildings that restrict renting your building through Airbnb or less than 30 days. And a lot of condo buildings do tend to have a policy that it has to be a minimum of 1 year rental, in which a subletter would be staying within the unit. And that's just to sort of keep too much transient coming and going within the building and to maintain better security. And finally, that brings us to condops, which is the rarest of the 3 types of entities. So condops are actually comprised of both condo and cooperative units. They tend to be mixed-use buildings where the commercial or retail space are individual condo units, and the residential units within the building comprise a cooperative unit. So these came about in the 1980s. Owners and developers were trying to get around a tax rule that said cooperatives couldn't get more than 20% of their income from non-residential or commercial spaces. So in order to get around that rule, they would create separate entities, and the commercial spaces would be condo units and the residential spaces would remain as cooperative units. And this would allow them to take advantage of the same type of tax incentives that pertain to condos and multifamily or single family housing that they were being denied by having more than 20% of their income come from non-residential spaces. And one other thing that I just want to touch on when it comes to condops, I think that there is this misperception that in condops they are portrayed to be less restrictive than a typical cooperative. And I haven't found that to be the case. Typically, the cooperative side of it tends to function as most cooperatives do and has similar restrictions and policies in place to sort of maintain the building and keep it safe and keep it functioning. But I would say that even condops tend to be a little bit more complex than your general cooperative, just because of the nature of having multiple entities. There are usually more than one board in these types of buildings. There's a board that manages the condo units, there's a board that manages the cooperative units, and then there's a board that sort of oversees the whole entity and its interaction between the two. So it does tend to be a little bit more complicated, I would even say, than a cooperative or a traditional cooperative. So as always, I hope that this information is useful and helps to demystify what is a condo, what is a co-op, and what is a condop, certainly, since it is pretty rare. I hope that everyone has a happy Halloween. Please feel free to share your comments or questions below, and I will see you all soon. Take care.